Welcome to The Gateway, your compass through the magical waters of spirit communication, broadcast live from United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM New Orleans. I'm your host, Cia Thomas. How are you guys doing out there? It's been a great week for me. I'm back in Las Vegas today. I've been in New York all last week, and it wasn't quite as hot as it is here. Vegas, it's been pretty hot. I've been fighting with my dog about her booties. She's got little shoes that she has to wear now because the pavement's so hot. But let me tell you about New York. So I was hiking in the woods in a place called Sweet Hollow. It's right in the middle of Long Island. For those who are kind of familiar with Long Island, or maybe you're not, it doesn't matter. There's an area right in the middle of the island, and it's not too far from Amityville. And this place is just full of myth and legends, and there it is. Yeah, you can kind of see it. It's perfectly triangle, and it's been carved in the middle. So I'll put it online for you guys to look at because we're going to play a game. And the game is, I want those listeners out there to look up my Facebook page and tell me what this rock was used for. It's handmade. I don't know if it's I thought maybe it was colonial. It might be Native American. I don't know. But what are your theories? I'm going to post it later today, and the winner is going to get a copy of my book, Dancing with Demons. So if you can't find my Facebook page, you can look it up by my webpage, clthomas.org. It's really easy, but that's the game. So that aside, my guest tonight, this is going to be so interesting, you guys. I'm just so excited. I can't even do it. I can't even do it. So she loves Victorian equipment, such as like paranormal old stuff. That's the only way I can describe it. This one of the things about the paranormal that I've always been really fascinated with is the Victorian age, because of spiritualism and some of the beginnings, the Victorian occult era. So Lauren Hellekson, who is my guest tonight, she engineers some equipment and the designing is very much based on Victorian occult inspired equipment for investigating. She's also an author, and she's a lecturer, and she also holds equipment building workshops. So I'm very excited to have her on. Let me pull her on here. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Hello. I'm super happy to be here. I'm well, thank you. Thank you.
So to start us off, how did you get into this niche market?
That's a great question. It's always a great question. I feel like I've answered it so many times that it never gets easier. How did I get here? I would say the short answer would be when I sort of became interested in the paranormal as an adult, kind of transitioning from that like scary stories into, oh, okay, people actually do kind of this stuff for a living. I noticed that everything was like really expensive and very like technical, and a lot of plastic, and a lot of just sort of, it was like the Radio Shack of the paranormal was sort of paranormal equipment. And I had always wondered why things that seemed very simple and maybe not so, it was like everything was sort of a replay of something else that we had usable, but it was so expensive. And so I started looking into like proximity sensors and why we use them in the paranormal and all this other stuff. And long story short, I was like, I feel like I could make that. And I started making them, and then I started making myself equipment just because it was more affordable than purchasing it. And I didn't have a 3D printer, and I've always loved, like you said, the paranormal old stuff. So like the Victorian style, like table tipping, spirit board, like pre-Ouija board, like witch boards, bells and pendulums, and all of this sort of like pseudo witchy, spooky goth aesthetic. And I wanted to have that in my equipment for the today. So, and I'm really big into like cosplay and Halloween. So that kind of started, and then I realized that there weren't a lot of women doing it, and so that's why I started teaching workshops as well too. So I was kind of like chicks can do stuff, so I'm just gonna do it, and I'm gonna put myself out there, and here we go, you know.
So you have one of these pieces of equipment that you're talking about right behind you. You showed it to me right before the show. Can you pull that out real quick? I just want the audience to see this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's my signature piece of equipment, and it has kind of started let me see if I'm gonna get a brighter light on it. It's kind of started the newest line that I have. It's typically, I don't know if it's backwards for you. Sorry, my camera's like on flip. But it's called the Ethereal Eye, and I get very theatrical, and I even put like Victorian Gothic like schematics on the back, and it actually has information about the device like in the schematics, which is really fun. And it says like the Ethereal Eye up there. But there's like the aesthetic reason, like it looks really cool, it looks really special, but it has like an electrical mechanical application to it. And then it also has that sort of like supernatural, like personal theoretical reasons behind sort of allowing something to acclimate itself in a haunted space, and maybe energy will interact with it a little bit. Oh, there's a kitty cat. Hello, little baby. I'm like a raccoon when it comes to cats.
I have a cat, and she has. I have a dog, and she has
a little Monroe.
Yes, and both of them have been so dramatic today. So.
Oh my gosh, I love them. They're a part of the show now.
Today, I forgot to close them out, and so now it's just better to have him in my lap because he'll start knocking everything down.
He's perfect. He's absolutely perfect. I don't even care about what we're talking about anymore. Let's talk about this cat. No, I love him. He's wonderful. Okay, I have to stop. But yeah, so it kind of just like it stemmed from there, and I'm most. This was the first piece of equipment that I ever built. And so it's kind of the same thing. This is the crystal pod. So it's a proximity sensor, but it's made out of wood and crystals and brass and
not plastic.
Yeah. You know, I mean, of course it's going to have plastic components on the inside and everything, but it has that sort of like vibe of when we think of paranormal, we think of that sort of spooky, spiritual. There's a whole theory on that whole reason as to why we always think ghosts are these like old, ancient, Victorian Gothic people, and it's never like, I don't know, Joe from down the street that died last week. But
right.
I think it's fun to make stuff that looks old. I love it.
Well,
like
part of that goes back to, we always investigate old homes and old prisons, old, actually a friend of mine posted on my Instagram account, why does everything have to be old? It's a good question, because it doesn't. You're right. It could be the neighbor that just died next door just recently.
There's so many theories with that. And when I say theories, I have to be very specific that there's scientific theory, which is very deeply based on, factual evidence and a lot of data and studies. And then there's personal theory, which is just like the hunch. And I think those two versions of that word are almost like attempted to be used interchangeably in the paranormal, and they definitely shouldn't be. So when I say theory, I mean personal theory, always. Usually I'll put on my like tinfoil hat if I'm starting to talk about things. This is like my shtick on podcasts. When we want to talk about spooky stuff, we got to put the tinfoil hat on. But there is this idea that it's all old stuff. It's the old stuff that's haunted. It's the old car that's haunted. It's the old doll that's haunted. It's the spider webs and cobwebs and black cats and spooky dark castles on the hill. And it's never like, the double wide. in the town over by the Walmart. And I find that very interesting. And while I play my aesthetic to that, it's more or less to just be done like ironically. I don't. I think there's a lot more when it comes to paranormal exploration than what meets the eye, and a lot of it has nothing to do with old dead people or dead people at all, really.
So your theories, I can't wait to get into some of your theories. One of them, and I kind of jumped ahead here in the interview, but it kind of goes along with what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So I interviewed a guy named Dr. Barry Taff. You may have heard of him. He was very prominent on a very popular, and I can't say the name of it, but it's a very popular documentary that was aired with some other really famous paranormal industry people. And he came out, he was pretty mad that this documentary came out. And this is why I didn't release that interview, because he went deep into it. And I wasn't sure, I don't want to get sued or anything. But
Sure.
He came out and he said he felt like all the findings that he was coming across was not demonic at all. It had more to do with the atmosphere. He said it was really high EMF readings, just a lot of different environmental issues going on with the land itself. And it wasn't just a property, it was like the entire block that this house sat on. It's something that they completely ignored in the film. I might have to release that interview at some point and just kind of edit some stuff out. It's a really good interview. But yeah. Is that what you mean when you're talking about?
Yeah. So I don't even, it's kind of like a two-parter, because I think that a lot of the supernatural experiences that human beings have can be like one of several things. If it's an authentic supernatural occurrence, it's happening so in such small percentages. Because if the paranormal was as prominent as the entertainment industry, and even as just the general paranormal industry makes it out to be, it would already be a public field of study. And right now it's still sort of in that fiction sector and that very like pseudoscience-y realm. And it's so engorged with these like pretend scientific theories to make everything seem very like it's what is the word that I want to say? We use scientific words and we use scientific methods, not the scientific method, dear gosh, but we use methods like measuring atmospheric things and EMF and things like that to almost like sort of validate us, sort of like cosplaying. My friend Alex Matsu says cosplaying as paranormal investigators. And I think that's why in that documentary you have all of those measurements and all of those things and all of those methods that we all should be using and we do use. And then it's so ironic that it gets thrown under the rug or it gets misconstrued into this like ghostly, ghastly apparition and experience when that's not what it was. And I find it funny because we want ghosts so bad. We want the scary old dead man so bad that we don't want to take a look at the very real data that is, maybe not beyond normal, but is different. And there could be a lot of these answers as to why human beings are experiencing these possible supernatural occurrences. But because honestly, it's such a big moneymaker because there is no proof. So that means everything's proof. It's very hard to sort through what is honest and what is entertainment. And I think real supernatural experiences could possibly occur just on such a small scale. Otherwise, it's usually psychosomatic. It's that confirmation bias. Or it's something that's very explainable, whether it is gas leaks or, dangerously high EMF, or things that are happening in the household, in the water, in something like that. And it's unfortunate that we want everything to be paranormal so badly that will almost harm people in the process of being a ghost hunter.
Yeah, that's true. And you see that a lot with mediumship as well. You have a lot of people taking advantage of the entertainment side. It's become just a money game, and people get hurt, quite frankly. I've seen that over and over again. Now, you've traveled all over the world researching paranormal activities, and you've been to like Israel and Spain and India. What are some of the supernatural activities you've come across?
So it's almost when I travel, a lot of it, because I think a lot of the answers to like what our supernatural experiences are is studying like that human experience and how different places or areas or experiences can affect how we see ourselves and how we see the world, and ultimately how we might see a supernatural experience. And one of the probably most profound experiences that, maybe was paranormal, but probably not. It was most likely, psychosomatic, is when I was in Jerusalem, and there is the main church inside the stone walls of Jerusalem, that they had pulled out this piece of petrified wood that they were calling this like Christ stone. This was supposedly the piece of wood that Christ was laid out on after, they were crucified, and it hadn't seen the light of day in 500 years. And, I was there to see it come out, and they bring it out, and it's I get goosebumps when I think about it. I'm not, a sort of a Christ deity follower. Like, I don't really work with deities or most like mainstream religions, but I have a deep respect for faith, and I think it's beautiful. And I think that a lot of faith is what keeps us going in the paranormal anyway. It has to be. But they bring out this piece of petrified wood, and I'm like, this has to be this moment where everybody I was like thinking like everybody's going to be silent, and there's going to be tears, and I cried, and I was like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed. And people started putting like their iPads on it and like their their cell phones on it. And
Really?
I'm like, that's so weird. It was so weird.
They
were so desperate because they were blessing their stuff. So you had to wait in line, and instead of just, when I got up to the front, I just touched it with my hand, and I just felt this sort of like radiating energy, and I was like, wow. And mind you, this is far after I had already sort of like deconstructed from the church and everything like that, and I'm in this place that I would have never saw myself in, when I was 21 and I left the church, and I'm being like overtaken by emotion, and it was so beautiful. And and people were just like their iPad on, and like rubbing their iPad on this like thousand-year-old stone, and I was like, what? And then on the other side of that too, there is this like silly sort of, well, I guess it's not really silly, but like Jerusalem syndrome, where you can be so overcome by, supposedly, by the, the power of Christ or the power of God, that you think that you are like a divine spirit or whatever. And I saw this woman at this church, and she was all shrouded in white, and she was just wandering around and just like murmuring to herself and like crawling around up, and I don't know, it was very bizarre. And being there was one of the most, I mean, that was weirder than any old prison I've ever been in. I mean, there was so much going on, and but experiencing something like that, it makes you truly understand how easy it is for an entire community to believe in something like ghosts you know,
Yeah.
the shadows of dead humans to be so prevalent, and you know, our loved ones wanting to speak to us beyond the veil, and all of these really things that at the core of them are so hopeful, and you see that all over the world.
You do. And it changes how the paranormal is in those cultures as well.
Yeah, it turns into this, I say confirmation bias all the time because that's just a lot of what the paranormal is. And it does, it turns into this deep hope for the magic and the belief and maybe the connection, or even sometimes it's just the like feeling special, like when you're at an investigation, and it's every investigation, no matter what, there's always the question of like, you know, can you say my name?
Yeah.
And because like we want the ghosts to know who we are, and we want to be the ones that they call out for. And I always find that fascinating, how deeply we want to connect. And I think it just sometimes it's just easier to try to connect with something that isn't tangible, that may or may not even really exist. And I see that no matter what. And I see a lot of the countries that I went to were very like spiritual countries. Like I studied for a little bit in India, and for meditation and like yogic practices, and it's the same thing there. Just this deep need and connection to a divine power in some way, shape, or form. Just that was like the goal of being a human, was connecting with divine power. And we see it here too, you know, in
Yeah, absolutely.
lots of religious groups, just that connection of needing to be connected to divinity. And then we see it in the paranormal, needing to be connected to the dead people.
Yeah, and you know, absolutely, and I'm guilty of that as well because I'm a very deeply spiritual person, and you know, everything that I perceive in the paranormal, I do. It's a deep connection for me, but it's personal. I guess for me, it's a little different because it's more personal. I'm not trying to, I guess, like entertain or like sway an investigation, or you know what I mean. It's more like I don't even talk about it a lot of times. But you see that in the paranormal over and over again. So, so in the write-ups that I have, you discuss keeping the paranormal spiritual beliefs and practices out of investigations, and when it's appropriate to bring them together. Can you discuss this a little bit?
Yeah. So like I just said about like faith being something that's so important, I think, and that includes a faith in nothing too. Like that absolutely includes people that might be, you know, atheist and agnostic. Like just being able to have faith in what you believe or don't believe in, I think is something that can be very powerful. But I tend to think that when we bring our more subjective belief system into the investigation, and we'll see this time and time and time again, it urges us to humanize the energy that we do not know is human or not. We do not know if the energy is intelligent or not. We do not know if it has, you know, any sort of sense of being or sentience or anything like that. We sort of place processes onto this supernatural energy, and we decide that it has a personality, and we decide that it has answers, and we decide that it has wants and needs because we have wants and needs and we want answers. So we are sort of projecting that, and a lot of that subjectivity comes from our sort of personal belief systems, whether it is our spiritual beliefs or, you know, I practice witchcraft, you know, I burn stuff and put people in the freezer, and you know, like I do things that are very based deeply on my belief in my own personal power. And if I were to bring that mindset into an investigation, then I would find myself wanting to find that human side of the energy and wanting to center myself in the investigation, whether or not I was by myself or not. Even by myself, you know, I would sit in a room by myself and I'd want to like talk and communicate. And I think that we are closing off a huge section of study in like supernatural occurrences by consistently humanizing the energy.
Mhm.
And I'm like 50-50 on if I think that it has, you know, any sort of supernatural occurrence has like sentience or has this sort of like consciousness. I'm 50-50 on that. But I do think that the more we treat something like, you know, it's old Jerry with the top hat, the more it's going to be presented to us as old Jerry with the top hat, because the power of suggestion is
Right.
so much stronger than people want to admit. The most unique and creative, one of a kind person has been swayed one way or another, whether it was just swayed to be different. Like, we are all a victim of suggestion. We're all a victim of our surroundings. It is how we dress. It is how we present ourselves. It is the shirts that we put on our bodies, the things that we do to our hair, the glasses that we wear on our face, the tattoos we adorn our skin with, is all from suggestion and all from influence of the world around us. And a lot of people have a really hard time agreeing with that because we all want to be individual. But it's the same sort of pushback that I get when I suggest, well, maybe we stop approaching supernatural occurrences like they're people. You know, still be respectful to a space like you would anybody else's house, but like separating our subjective beliefs with our sort of processes and methods in paranormal investigating can change the entire game if we stop trying to communicate with everything. Because the communication isn't always going to have the answers. Just because we're getting answers doesn't mean we're getting answers.
Yeah.
But I will say sometimes it is appropriate. And sometimes if you are just wanting to connect to energy in different ways, it can be very appropriate to bring a spiritual side into it. So I think it just depends on what the questions are that you want answered when you go into an investigation or an exploration. There are some times where I'm very much like, I want to document some sort of movement, and with that movement, I want to be able to also have, you know, this, and this documented and measured and written down so that I can see like what the environment is doing to harbor this supernatural occurrence or anything like that. And I might not get any movement that night, and that's okay. And then maybe for the last 10 minutes, I just put everything away and I sit in the middle of one of the spookiest rooms and I meditate for 10 minutes to just see what my body does. Because that's data too. It's not really something that I can document. It's purely subjective, but it's interesting. So
I think there's also a fine line though between you're trying to get paranormal answers for, you know, either a family or somebody that's asking these questions versus yourself going in to find answers for your personal reasons, right? So maybe you go in as like a medium or something and try to communicate on a personal level, you know.
See,
but then
I completely cut out the whole like communicative, unless honestly I will typically like, and I used to be I used to be very much into like communication and trying to find that connection and trying to find those personal answers and seeing if it's little Tommy that's in the basement. But I'm trying to approach now by thinking beyond human. So maybe it is not deceased humans occupying haunted spaces in any capacity. And it's funny when I pose that question of like, how would you enter a space if I told you that we have full, factual, 100% certainty proof that ghosts don't exist, but some things are still happening? How would you go in and investigate a space? If I could tell you without a shadow of a doubt, ghosts aren't people. They're not people. You can't communicate with them. How would you investigate that space? And it's kind of like, that sort of happens. And that's okay.
Well, that's where you come in with all your scientific equipment. And
I mean, I don't have the answers either. I just love to ask the questions. Because then they're like, well, what would you do? And I go, I don't know. I haven't really figured it out yet, but hopefully we're getting there.
See, I don't know, because, I have my own set. Again, it's like we said earlier, I have my own set of beliefs, and
Yep.
I go in, but at the same time, you're right, because we do need to be open.
It's
Right,
just diversifying.
right.
Yeah.
But you do have your list of do's and don'ts, the stuff that you would accept and the stuff that you don't. I saw those somewhere where, like, I forget what they are. You know what they are. They were written on your website.
And this is also too, I have to make sure that I'm not just like this cynic who wants to, poo-poo on people's data, because when my mom passed away, like, I saw my mom like 2 different times. Like, there was a point in time right after my mom passed that I saw my mom, and this is so funny, I saw some like little old man in the towel section at a store in the mall who wasn't there. And then I had what was the other experience? I had a series of sort of like interesting, like weird personal experiences, all personal experiences. So for me to also still say, I want to figure out ways to investigate areas considering that ghosts are not people. I'm not saying that because I'm telling everybody, that wasn't your grandpa giving you a sign. I'm saying it because it diversifies the methods, because we have been paranormal investigating in the exact same manner for the past 20 years.
Right.
And we're not changing. We're doing all the things that we've seen on television, whether or not people want to admit that or not, but we're doing, and we're not getting, again, just because we're getting answers doesn't mean we're getting answers. I can get out a Ouija board and put the planchette on it, and it can move all by itself in circles. That's not an answer. Nothing is telling me what's happening. Nothing is telling me why that supernatural experience is occurring. Nothing is telling me like how we can document it, measure it, and recreate it consistently. That is how we get answers. But if we're not using methods that we can sort of have a process that can be duplicated and the results can be recreated, over and over and over, that's when I'm impressed. Everything else I don't. Everything else is just cool for me. And in lists of like the whole like do's and don'ts and what I would accept and what I wouldn't accept. Oh my God, it changes. I feel like it changes so much. I feel like I'll have an opinion on something on 1 week, and then the next week I like dove into it so hard that I'm like, did I just talk myself out of that?
Well, and that's how it should be. I always said, this whole field is something where you should be learning every day. There are no experts.
And like changing your mind and getting infuriated and like making equipment that you just talk yourself out of ever using, and you're like, do I even want to use these anymore?
It's so true, though. I mean, it should be something that, we're all learners, and we should be educating ourselves all the time. Nobody's an expert in this field. I don't care how long anybody says, because they've been on TV for 10 years. I don't care if it was 50 years. We're still not an expert.
Absolutely. There are no experts. There's no certifying agency. Being a paranormal investigator doesn't mean anything. Anybody can say that. They can make a t-shirt and put a team name on it, and they can say that. That's all it takes.
Exactly. So when it comes to de-anthropomorphizing, I always say this word wrong, the paranormal, what are some of the ways that we can do this?
So like taking like de-anthropomorphizing.
Yes.
I know. Isn't it the best word?
You know what I mean.
I know what you mean. It's an awful word. Do you know how many times I'll write that word down because I need it for like a document, or I need it in like a report to just like, instead of humanize and dehumanize, because those are such terrible. I mean, I'll use humanize, but I don't like using the term like, we need to dehumanize, because that just sounds so aggressive. So, anapomorphi. You know what? It looks so good on paper, and I am my reading teacher mother is rolling in her grave right now. No, she's not. She was cremated, but I have never been good. I was always an in my head reader. So I was bullied so often for saying words incorrectly. And even I should just clip this and send this to my girlfriends, because they have had to correct me so many times on just words, and they're like, "Are you sure that's how you say that?" And I'm like, "Listen, that's how I'm going to say it, okay? We're just going to be fine."
That's how I say it, okay?
Yeah, it's fine. It's totally fine. It's perfect. Anamorphosize. Well, she's been discredited. Let's not listen to Lauren anymore. So it's part of the human condition to seek out those connections and to seek out other human beings. So, I mean, it is ingrained in our DNA. When a child, one of the first things that they can do is recognize their parent. So they learn automatically how to make patterns, how to create patterns that they're familiar with. And it's why pareidolia exists, where we are seeing something and we can see a face, we see a tree, we see a face. But not even just that, though, like the humanizing part, it's the same reason why, like, some people will eat that last piece of broccoli because they don't want it to be lonely. Or they will make sure that there's more than one stuffed animal on the bed because they don't want it to be lonely. Or, like, if there's just one fork left, they'll just throw that in the dishwasher so it could be with all of its friends. Like, there's weird little thing. Or maybe I'm just crazy, who knows? I know there's other people like that out there. But
it sounds like a whole psychological issue.
Everything has a soul, okay? She says, as she talks about not humanizing supernatural energy. So really, you can take it from me, it is very difficult to not want to find things that relate to being human in a supernatural space, because you have a lot of factors going against you. Whether or not people want to admit their fear, I mean, it's a scary concept, dead people being able to communicate with you, or other things that are not on this plane of existence that can interact with you. Like, that's scary. And so of course we want to try to connect to it. We don't want it to like storm our dreams. So if you go into a space and you're like, okay, I'm going to do some experimentation that has nothing to do with communication, it doesn't mean that you're going in and you want to be, if it is, Uncle George in the house, you are not going in there and being like, you don't exist, ha ha ha, because then you're still humanizing it. So you're not going in with this sort of disrespect or this disproof. You're more or less just, you're becoming the observer instead of the engager. And we have so much engaging in the paranormal that I call it main character syndrome. We all want to be the people that find the evidence. So if you just step into an exploration and you have your equipment, or you don't have your equipment, maybe you are just, you're going to read some tarot for the room or whatever. But going in and experiencing the space. So if it's equipment, you're setting up all this equipment. You know exactly what that equipment's for. You're going to set it up just in a very strategic way. Have your notebook out, write down where all the equipment is, what this and that. If you need some baseline readings, this and that. And sometimes it's just sitting down and observing for an hour. Noting
That's one of the things I like to do. I like to just go in and just take in the room without anybody telling me where the activity is or anything. I just want to sit in the room quietly without any equipment or anything, just to take it in, just to get the feeling of the room itself and the space.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then I just turn that into the entire investigation. I just do nothing but observe. It is fun if there's other investigators, because I will sort of like follow other people around, set up my equipment, and just observe them in that space to see if there's any changes that happen. But I have slowly stopped becoming the engager, and I'm just more interested in taking on the role as the observer now. I just don't think that there's enough observers.
That's interesting. Do you find that the typical paranormal team will have like your medium or somebody like that walk through the place and then pick up whatever it is that they pick up, and then that's where the investigators will set up all of the equipment and everything? Do you think that that kind of sways or manipulates the investigation?
I think so there is a piece of entertainment, because we all know that bringing mediums on paranormal investigations is all from entertainment, and I'm not discrediting mediums. I have, a very small handful of friends that I do believe have gifts. And it's funny because they're like gifts in a very practical way. Like they're not really being like, oh, I sense your mother wants to give you a message. It's actually like, hey, I'm being told to like check on your brakes. Check on your brakes. And I'm like, that's cool. I like that. But I do think that going in and having anybody tell you where to set up and that is the only thing that you listen to is absolutely going to sway. But at that point, it is just, that's either entertainment or you are kind of, maybe it's a private investigation and they want to know if it's their grandpa in their house. So it's kind of a, I'm going to get, I always really toe the line of getting canceled. It's kind of like a dog and pony show sometimes, because I do know a lot of mediums that go into a space that do not say anything. They take notes. They do not tell anybody where to go. They do not do anything. They take in the space, they take notes. And then when it's time to sort of like debrief and talk about things or maybe make a plan, then maybe they'll talk about it, or they'll do a walkthrough. Like I really love, gosh darn it, what is that show? I love that show. It's Cindy Kaza now. The one where it's the cop, the Brooklyn PD, cop, and the medium, and she walks through and he does all of the like on the beat investigating. Like he looks into the history, he looks into the previous owners, he interviews the family, and she does this walkthrough, and at the end they get together and they talk about their findings together. Right. And while that is entertainment, I do think that that is such a great method that can be used, even though mediumship and psychic ability is a very subjective process. It is. It's a very, there is no way to kind of, there's really no way to prove or disprove a lot of that information, no matter what, like not beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I think that kind of gives it a little bit more objectivity when you separate everybody, and sort of that's how you conduct the session. I do have a lot of experiments that have to do with like mediums reading a space, but not in a like human capacity, in a different capacity. But that'll probably come out sometime next year. But so I do love the idea of like working with mediums in sort of again, in like an observational way, where I want to sort of create stimulus within a space and see if, what they can pick up on, and this and that, and the other thing. And I find it fascinating. I like to very infuriatingly say I don't believe or disbelieve in anything. So except for that the earth is flat. That is not true. It is round. Everybody, it is round. It's a globe. Are you sure it's not square or something like that? It is round. It is a hexagon. It doesn't it's actually becoming a little bit like almost like a oblong sort of shape because of the magnetic pull on the North and South Pole anyway. So technically it's not a circle. It's more like a... It's kind of lumpy. There's a picture that's circulating the internet without the water, and it's Oh, yeah. It's like a cored apple. Like it's like an eaten apple. It's crazy because of how much the earth is made out of ocean. It's almost terrifying.
Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is. So I do want to get into some of the equipment that you use. So much of the equipment from paranormal comes from the Victorian spiritualism movement. Um, can you talk a little bit about the equipment that you design and kind of where the ideas came from?
So when it, the majority of the things that I put together with like the Victorian aesthetic is almost because I want to merge what we have access to now with what they didn't have access to before. So like if we take this beautiful beast again, the whole idea behind this is that it is like a multi-trigger motion sensor, and I can actually I can plug it into my laptop, and I have like rolling trigger data with timestamps and all sorts of fantastic things. And it's actually modeled after like an old pinhole camera.
Oh, that's so
So
cool.
that's kind of
You know, I used
why
to
it looks
make
the way it.
cameras.
Huh? Yeah. Oh, I made one. I constructed one because the eclipse was right over our house, so we had an eclipse party, and I had like a pinhole station, and you had like a little card, and you could put your card in the pinhole station and like see where the eclipse was, and it was so cool. But I think I was the only one that really spent all the time there. But yeah, it's kind of supposed to look like an old pinhole camera because visually you have all of that, you know,
But
Victorian.
what does that do?
Oh,
What
this?
does that, yes, what does that do?
So it's a motion sensor. It uses ultrasonic sound, microwave Doppler, and passive infrared to sense motion. And then when it senses something, the little crystal on top will light up. And then on my computer screen, it'll have some rolling data, and it will say like microwave motion sensor triggered at 12:42 and whatever seconds, and then it'll tell you when the motion stops. And then for ultrasonic, because you can get measurement with ultrasonic, it will tell you how far away whatever it was that passed in front of it. It'll tell you how far away from the machine it was, up to like 2 meters. And then the passive infrared is just like your standard. You have to be emitting infrared radiation like a human being in order to set that off. So.
And then you have the crystal pod. What does that do?
The crystal pod is a proximity sensor, and we know proximity sensors in the paranormal most famously as the REM pod. And essentially it is a capacitive proximity sensor, so which means it needs something that is a conductor to come near or around it in order to complete the connection and set it off. And it's the theory behind the proximity sensor, and this of course is not something that would have been based, well, actually no, it's more like, what, 1940s-ish? I gotta fact check myself. This is still based off of a very, an old, here we go. Oh, 1919, 1930, 1919. But this is, which is super fun. So even though this was, Gary Galka, what, 1996 or no, like 2002. What? Forgive me.
Wait, I don't know how long those shows have been on either, come to think of it.
Well, 2004 debuted Ghost Hunters, and I want to say Gary Galka created the Das REM pod just a couple years before that. So I want to say maybe 2002. I'm not so worried about that invention date, because in 1919, that's the piece of equipment that the DOS REM pod and subsequently all capacitive proximity sensors in the paranormal, at least, were based on an instrument called the theremin. And if we are familiar with, old-timey, like Nosferatu, that horror movie, you hear like the that's a theremin. Or sometimes it's like a saw where they like could be that too. But
is this the part where the medium is like spitting out the ectoplasm?
Yes. So the theremin was actually the result of an experiment when the Soviet government was experimenting with capacitive proximity sensors. And one of the scientists was like, I kind of like my project, so I'm going to keep it. I'm going to turn it into this musical instrument. And then the theremin was born into existence, and it is a capacitive proximity sensor, which means that it needs, another conductor in order to complete a circuit and make it work. Proximity means that it needs to, we say proximity as in if this is turned on, I have to be, there's no battery in this one. I have to be within its proximity in order to set it off, but you don't need to come into physical contact with the device. So a theremin consists of two different antennas. You have an antenna for tone and you have an antenna for volume, and you play it by not touching it. It creates this electromagnetic field that you use your capacitance as a human being to I just want to make a gif of me doing this and like, what is she talking about?
I'm just picturing like the ectoplasm and the music as you're talking. That's what I'm envisioning here.
And that's what it is. And then Gary Galka, he was kind of, into the spookiness, and he had a daughter who passed away, and that's sort of why he started making equipment. He wanted to, or so that's the story that's told with his, creation of the DOS REM pod. But he modified a theremin to just have, one antenna, and that's why you have the DOS REM pod, and it goes woo, woo. That is just the condensed version of the theremin, and he added the temperature deviation with a programmable microchip into it, and that piece of equipment was born into the paranormal. And of course, they could have maybe I don't know if they used theremins in Victorian. I do know that a lot of the more Victorian Gothic style, the original REM pod for the Victorian age, dang it, I used to have one right on my desk, a compass.
It's a compass, yeah.
So your compass is going to be attracted to the electromagnetic pull of the Earth's poles, and if you are somewhere where there is a deviation in the electromagnetic field, your compass is going to spin. So you had compasses, and then the dowsing rods were not necessarily for, yes-no stuff. It was to find energy. It was to find the electromagnetic radiation of moving water. So, and they still do that in Appalachia. They use a stick, they have a dowser that comes to your house before you dig your well, and they find exactly where you're supposed to dig. That's still practiced today. That's so cool, by the way.
That is really cool. Only the Appalachians.
So freaking cool that the people still do that, and they're spot on. And the idea behind that is, running water creates a level of sort of electromagnetism, and if you are, in tune to know what to feel for, you can find your water source. So there's, and then you have the pendulums, and then you have the whole sort of charlatan sort of
like Thomas Edison radio.
Oh, his like the spirit phone.
Yeah. Spirit phone. The spirit box.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and honestly, that's the first sort of revolutionizing of like ITC transcommunication was that old phone, and then you pick it up and maybe you hear voices from beyond the veil, but it shows you that this has been a question for humans because we're faced with our mortality. We want to know, like, what's next? We want to know, do we live on, especially like our loved ones? We want to know, like, we want to feel like they are still somewhere. And we could even go back farther than just, the Victorian sort of 1800s, but, that's when it started to boom.
Right.
That's when they started, because you had, a lot of.
Well, I think that's when you look at cultural throughout history, it wasn't as demonized in the Victorian
Oh my
age. People
gosh, no.
would come out and talk about it, whereas prior, you would be demonized by the church.
If you weren't doing it in a church capacity, yeah. And
Right.
there was still a lot of pushback, but because rich people were into it, then it was okay.
There's that too.
And that's kind of what it was. It was, the back alley witches and the people practicing the occult, that were getting demonized by the church, and then all of a sudden some rich woman lost her husband and went to that back alley to see if, somebody could conjure him up, and all of a sudden she starts telling her friends, and it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. And then of course you have people that are like, wow, I could capitalize on this.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when you have that sort of Victorian spirit photography, and you have the ectoplasm photography, and you have the table tipping and the witch boards, and all of these sort of interesting and weird science fiction things blowing up. But then there was a lot of death that was happening. There was a lot of incurable diseases, and people were dying, by the hundreds of thousands. So death was always in the forefront of the time. So of course people are going to kind of notice that and be interested in it.
Exactly.
And yeah, and it just.
And if you take a look at what their lives were like, it wasn't as populated as it is now. There was a lot more woods. If you lived out in the suburbs, you were pretty much isolated. If you weren't in the city, no matter where you were. I was reading some journals from Nathaniel Hawthorne. I'm kind of working on a project, and even I guess he had like a metaphysical group that he would hang out with, and they were experimenting with transcendentalism. Transcendentalism, there we go with pronunciations again. Meditation. And they actually formed, it wasn't quite a cult, but it could have been. It was all the major writers. It was Walt Whitman, it was Emerson, it was Hawthorne. They all had this group that they were doing this meditation in transcendentalism up in New England. It's so interesting. But part of that was they called in a medium and did a table tipping session right in Hawthorne's home. It's just to give you guys an idea of how prevalent it was back then.
It was crazy how normalized it was.
Mm-hmm. It was just totally normal.
And it was like at parties, and I'm talking like swanky parties. If you were going to the the estate down the street, they were probably going to have hired a psychic to come in, or they were going to hire it was a lot of psychics, really, or what would have been, because it would have been predominantly like women that would have come in as psychics. I think some men played as psychics, but I think a lot of men referred to themselves as something else in like the 1800s when it came to, what is that? There was a word for it. Oh well, you know what? I'm gonna look later. It's okay. But yeah, that was like the entertainment.
Huge entertainment.
Could be problematic, because then again, it started to get very bastardized, and people started to really sort of take advantage of, being charlatans. Yeah.
I think that's when the charlatan stuff really did start to come out as well, same era. Well, Lauren, it was so great to have you on the show. I know you teach workshops. You got 2 books out, Dark Moonlight and The Dark Village. Where can people find these, and what have you got coming up, and how can they join your workshops?
So if you, I think it's right there. If you search Lauren Hantz, I am the first thing that comes up. I want to say, I think my website comes up, and then my Facebook and some of my socials come up. So Lauren Hantz is definitely the way best to find me. A lot easier to spell than my last name. I do have a workshop coming up this Friday. It's in Ohio, in Middletown, Ohio. And then I'll be at Hillview Manor, which is a haunt out in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. And I'm actually doing an event called Spirit and Science with my friend Charisse Williams, who is a tarot reader. So we are working to kind of combine our opinions and our powers to formulate that sort of like fun little happening of bringing all those things together. So that's where you can find all my stuff. Lauren Haunts.
Lauren Haunts, you guys, you got to look her up. She's great. Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show.
It's been awesome. It really has. Thank you so much.
So that's Lauren Haunts. I love her. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Gateway, live from 107.7 FM New Orleans. That's United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM New Orleans. Until next time.